Hello and welcome. Two things. Lock your windows and doors. Second thing, be sure to plug in your earphones for a deeper experience. Sweet imagination. I got the call at 4:47 a.m. on November 3rd. Dispatch said someone had called 911 from the truck stop on Highway 12, screaming about people disappearing at Mel's Diner. I'm Detective Jim Morrison. Been working these back roads for 12 years. I thought it was probably just a drunk causing trouble. I pulled into Mel's parking lot at 5:02 a.m. The neon sign was still buzzing. All the lights were on inside. I could see the coffee maker still brewing through the window. Everything looked normal except for one thing. There were 8 cars in the parking lot, but the diner was completely empty. I walked inside and called out. Nobody answered. The grill was still hot. There was bacon cooking, turning black around the edges. A cup of coffee sat on the counter, still warm. Car keys and wallets were scattered on tables like people had just vanished in the middle of eating. I checked the bathrooms, the storage room, the office and back. Nothing. 8 cars outside, but not a single person inside. That's when I noticed the security cameras. For different angles, all showing the dining room. I pulled up the footage on Mel's old computer. At 3:30 a.m., I could see everyone clear as day. 9 people total, staff and customers. They were all there, talking, eating, working. Then at 3:47 a.m., the cameras went to static for exactly 30 seconds. When the picture came back, the diner was empty. 9 people had vanished in half a minute. That's when I drove over to the truck stop and found Jessica Williams, 22 years old, covered in blood and broken glass, shaking so hard she could barely speak. She was the only survivor of whatever happened at Mel's that night. This is her story. This is what she told me about the night shift. Mel's all-night diner sits on Highway 12, right between Cedar Falls and Millbrook. It's been there since 1952, owned by the Patterson family for 3 generations. Classic place, red vinyl booths, black and white checker floor, pie case by the register. I used to eat there as a kid when my dad drove truck routes. Mel Patterson Sr. built it as a place for truckers and travelers to grab a hot meal any time of day or night. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and strangers were always welcome. Jessica Williams had been working the night shift for 8 months. She was putting herself through nursing school, needed the job to pay for classes. Smart girl, hard-working, never caused any trouble. Her parents live over in Millbrook. Good people, raise her right. November 2nd started like any other Thursday night. Jessica clocked in at 11 p.m. for her usual shift. Mel Patterson was there working on the books. He'd been having money troubles lately, trying to keep the diner running. Danny Torres was in the kitchen, 19-year-old kid who cooked nights to save money for college. The night shift at Mel's was usually quiet. After midnight, you'd get a few truckers, maybe some insomniacs who couldn't sleep, teenagers looking for somewhere to hang out. Nothing exciting ever happened. That's what made November 3rd so different. I spent weeks after the incident learning about the people who disappeared that night. 9 people total, counting Jessica's co-workers. Each one had a story, a family, a reason for being at Mel's in the middle of the night. Ruth Miller was 45, worked as a bookkeeper in town. She'd been an insomniac for years, ever since her husband died in a car accident. She came to Mel's every night around 1 a.m., ordered decaf coffee and apple pie, sat in the same booth reading romance novels. Frank Hayes was a trucker from Ohio, drove the same route twice a month for 15 years. Always stopped at Mel's for coffee, and whatever pie was fresh. He had pictures of his grandkids in his wallet, was planning to retire next year. The Johnson twins, Tyler and Travis, were 16 years old. They'd snuck out of their parents' house and were hiding at the diner, probably figuring out how to get home without getting caught. Good kids, just being teenagers. There were 5 other customers at night. Travelers, night workers, people with their own reasons for being awake at 3 a.m. I talked to all their families, sat in their living rooms, looked at their photos. Normal people living normal lives until they walked into Mel's Diner. Jessica told me everything started out ordinary. She clocked in at 11 p.m., tied her apron, started wiping down tables. Mel was in the back office with his calculator and receipt books, trying to figure out how to pay his suppliers. Danny Torres was prepping for the night shift, cleaning the grill, restocking the walk-in cooler, getting ready for whatever customers might wander in. He was a good kid, reminded Jessica of her little brother. Always had a joke to tell, always willing to help out. The first customers came in around 11:30. Ruth Miller took her usual booth by the window. Frank Hayes sat at the counter and ordered coffee and pecan pie. The Johnson twins grabbed a back booth and ordered Cokes, whispering about something they didn't want adults to hear. Jessica said it felt like every other night shift she'd worked. Quiet conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine, Danny humming while he cooked. The kind of peaceful late-night atmosphere that made people feel safe. Around midnight, a few more customers trickled in. A couple driving through town, an off-duty nurse Jessica recognized from the hospital, a construction worker getting off a late shift. By 12:30 a.m., all 9 people were there, settled in for what should have been an ordinary night. Jessica was refilling coffee cups and taking orders. Danny was cooking burgers and fries. Mel was still hunched over his books, muttering about numbers that didn't add up. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. That lasted until 1 a.m. Jessica was wiping down the counter when the door chimed at exactly 1:03 a.m. She looked up and saw a man walking in, tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a dark coat that looked old-fashioned. She figured he was just another late-night traveler. The man walked straight to the corner booth, the one nobody ever sat in, because it was tucked away from everything else. He sat down and folded his hands on the table. Jessica grabbed a menu and walked over to take his order. She said he never looked up at her, never spoke. She asked what he wanted to drink, what he wanted to eat. Nothing. He just sat there with his hands folded, staring down at the table like he was looking right through it. Jessica thought maybe he couldn't speak English, or maybe he was deaf. She pointed to items on the menu, tried to get his attention. Finally, she just left the menu on his table and walked away. She figured he'd order when he was ready. That's when she noticed the other customers were getting quiet. Ruth Miller had stopped reading her book. Frank Hayes was just staring into his coffee cup. The Johnson twins weren't whispering anymore. They were looking toward the corner booth with worried expressions. Jessica asked Danny if he'd seen a man come in. Danny looked through the pass-through window from the kitchen and went pale. He said the man gave him the creeps. Something about the way he just sat there without moving. Around 1:30, Jessica tried again. She walked over to the corner booth with a coffee pot, ready to pour him a cup whether he ordered it or not. That's when she noticed he'd left money on the table. 3 old silver coins she'd never seen before. The coins looked ancient, tarnished black with age. They weren't American money, weren't anything she recognized. But she took them and walked away, figuring it was payment for whatever he wanted. The weird thing was, she never saw him put the coins down. They were just there. Around 2 a.m., the diner started feeling different. Jessica couldn't put her finger on it at first, but something was wrong. The air felt heavier. The conversations got quieter. Everyone kept glancing toward the corner booth where the stranger Saturday. The lights started flickering around 2:15. Just little flickers at first, like a power surge. Then the radio behind the counter started picking up weird frequencies, voices speaking in languages nobody recognized, static that sounded almost like whispers. Ruth Miller got up to leave around 2:30. She'd finished her pie, paid her check, said goodnight to Jessica. But when she got to the door, she stopped. Jessica watched her try to push it open, but the door wouldn't budge. Ruth pushed harder, threw her whole weight against it, but it was like the door was sealed shut. Frank Hayes went to help her, 2 of them pushing on the door, but it wouldn't move an inch. Then Frank said he'd go out through the kitchen, but the back door was the same way, locked tight, like the building had sealed itself up. That's when people started to panic. The Johnson twins ran to the windows, tried to open them. Nothing. The construction worker tried to break a window with a chair, but the glass wouldn't crack. It was like they were trapped inside with no way out. Jessica ran to the corner booth to ask the stranger what was happening, if he knew why they couldn't leave. But when she got there, She stopped cold. The man hadn't moved since he sat down. He was in exactly the same position, hands folded, staring down at the table. He hadn't blinked, hadn't shifted in his seat, hadn't even breathed as far as she could tell. She leaned closer and realized she couldn't see his eyes. There was shadow where his eyes should be, like his face was a mask with nothing behind it. And he was cold. She could feel the cold radiating off him like he was made of ice. The diner was getting colder by the minute. Everyone's breath started showing in the air. The coffee was steaming more than usual. Frost began forming on the windows. In November in Georgia, it was 70 degrees outside, but inside Mel's diner, it felt like winter. At 3:07 a.m., Ruth Miller stopped trying to get the door open. She just stopped, turned around, and started walking toward the corner booth. Jessica called out to her, asked what she was doing, but Ruth didn't answer. She walked like she was sleepwalking. Ruth sat down across from the stranger. Jessica could see them through the serving window from behind the counter. Ruth was talking to him, but Jessica couldn't hear what she was saying. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then Ruth Miller just disappeared. Not like she got up and walked away. She was there 1 second, gone the next, like she'd never existed. The stranger was still sitting in the same position, hands folded, staring down at the table. Everyone in the diner saw it happen. Danny Torres dropped a plate in the kitchen. Frank Hayes started swearing. The Johnson twins grabbed each other and backed against the wall. But 5 minutes later, Frank Hayes did the exact same thing. Frank got up from the counter, left his coffee and pie, and walked to the corner booth. He sat down across from the stranger. Jessica could see his mouth moving, having a conversation with someone who never looked up, never spoke back. Then Frank Hayes disappeared too. One by one, they all did it. The off-duty nurse, the construction worker, the couple who'd been driving through town. They'd get up, walk to the corner booth, sit down, have a silent conversation, and vanish. The stranger never moved, never changed position. Jessica was hiding behind the counter by then, watching through the pass-through window. Danny Torres came out of the kitchen around 3:30, and she begged him not to look at the corner booth, not to walk over there. But it was like he couldn't hear her. Danny walked to the booth, sat down across from the stranger, and started talking. Jessica could see his lips moving, could see him nodding like someone was answering him. Then Danny Torres disappeared just like all the others. The Johnson twins were the hardest to watch. They were just kids, 16 years old, probably scared out of their minds. They held hands when they walked to the booth, sat down together on the same side. The conversation lasted longer with them, maybe 5 minutes. Then they were both gone. Mel Patterson came out of the office last. He'd been working on his books, hadn't noticed what was happening until it was too late. Jessica tried to warn him, tried to tell him not to look at the corner booth. But old Mel walked over there just like everyone else, sat down, had his conversation, and disappeared. That left just Jessica and the stranger, alone in the diner at 3:45 a.m. Jessica told me she stayed behind that counter for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. She could hear the stranger moving for the first time since he'd arrived. His chair creaked as he shifted position. She peeked over the counter and saw him standing up. He was taller than she'd thought, maybe 6.5 feet. His coat hung on him like it was too big, like there wasn't much underneath it. He started walking toward the counter, where she was hiding. Jessica said she could feel him getting closer, even though she couldn't see him. The air got colder, and she could smell something rotten, like meat that had been left out too long. She knew he was coming for her, knew she was going to disappear just like all the others. That's when she did something that saved her life. Instead of standing up and walking to the booth like everyone else, she crawled toward the kitchen on her hands and knees, staying below the counter where he couldn't see her. She made it to the kitchen and kept crawling toward the back door. She could hear footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate, like he knew exactly where she was going. The back door was still locked tight, but there was a window above the prep sink. Jessica climbed onto the counter and started hitting the window with everything she could find. A rolling pin, a cast iron pan, a meat cleaver. The glass wouldn't break, no matter what she threw at it. But she kept trying because she could hear him getting closer. Finally, she grabbed a full coffee pot, scalding hot coffee still inside, and threw it as hard as she could. The windows shattered, and cold air rushed in from outside. She could feel the spell, or whatever was breaking as real air entered the kitchen. Jessica climbed to the broken window, cut herself on the glass, and dropped 8 feet to the ground behind the diner. She could hear footsteps inside, moving toward the kitchen, but she didn't look back. She ran across Highway 12 to the truck stop and called 911 from the payphone. She was still on the phone with dispatch when I got the call, covered in blood from the broken glass, shaking like a leaf, but alive, the only person who walked out of Mel's diner that night. I spent 3 months investigating what happened at Mel's. I interviewed Jessica dozens of times, checked every detail of her story. I pulled phone records, credit card receipts, security footage from other businesses. Everything she told me checked out. The security cameras at Mel's showed exactly what Jessica described. At 3:30 a.m., all 9 people were there. At 3:47 a.m., the cameras went to static. When the picture cleared at 3:48 a.m., the diner was empty except for Jessica hiding behind the counter. Here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. None of the cameras showed the stranger. Not when he walked in, not when he was sitting in the booth, not when he was walking around the diner. It was like he didn't exist, but somehow everyone could see him and talk to him. I checked missing persons reports, looked for similar cases, talked to other cops in nearby counties. Nothing. 8 people vanished without a trace, leaving behind cars, wallets, purses, everything. Their families hired private investigators, offered rewards, did everything they could think of. We never found a single clue. The Patterson family owned that land since 1952, but I found out something interesting when I dug into the history. Before Mel's grandfather bought it, the land was empty for 20 years. Before that, there was a boarding house that burned down in 1930. 7 people died in that fire, including the owner. Local old-timers told me stories about that boarding house. They said the owner was a strange man who kept to himself, took in travelers but charged them in old silver coins instead of regular money. They said guests would check in but sometimes never check out. I found 3 of those old silver coins in the corner booth where the stranger had been sitting. Same type of coins Jessica described him leaving on the table. The coins were so old and tarnished that a collector I showed them said they might be from the 1800s. Mel's diner closed permanently 2 weeks after the incident. The Patterson family couldn't afford to keep it running anyway, and after what happened, nobody wanted to eat there. The building's been empty ever since. Jessica Williams never went back to work. She dropped out of nursing school, moved back in with her parents in Millbrook. For months, she wouldn't leave the house after dark, wouldn't go anywhere alone. She'd wake up screaming about the stranger in the corner booth. I checked on her every few weeks during the first year. She was seeing a therapist, trying to get her life back together. But she'd changed. She was always looking over her shoulder, always checking to make sure doors weren't locked from the inside. The families of the missing people never stop hoping. Ruth Miller's sister calls me every few months, asking if there are any new leads. Frank Hayes' daughter sends me Christmas cards with pictures of the grandchildren he'll never meet. It breaks my heart every time. I drive past the old Mel's Diner every few weeks when I'm patrolling Highway 12. The building's falling apart now. Windows boarded up, parking lot full of weeds, neon sign dark. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see a light on in the corner booth. Local kids dare each other to break into the old diner, but nobody ever does. Truckers who used to stop there regularly now drive an extra 50 miles to the next truck stop. Word gets around about places like that. Jessica moved to Florida about 2 years ago, got married, started over somewhere new. But she still calls me sometimes, usually around 3 a.m., to tell me about dreams she has. Dreams about the stranger in the corner booth, still sitting there, still waiting. I officially close the case as a mass disappearance with no suspects and no leads. But I keep the file on my desk, and I still patrol that stretch of highway every night. Part of me hopes I'll find some clue I missed, some way to bring those people home to their families. The other part of me hopes I never find out what really happened in that corner booth. Some things are better left alone. Some doors should stay closed. Some strangers should never be served. If you ever find yourself driving Highway 12 late at night, you'll see the Old Mel's Diner on your right, dark and abandoned. Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look too close at the windows. Because sometimes if the light hits the glass just right, you might see someone sitting in the corner booth. Someone who's been waiting a very long time for the next customer to walk through that door. And if you see him, whatever you do, don't go inside. Don't sit down across from him. Don't try to have a conversation. Because once you start talking to the stranger in the corner booth, the conversation never really ends. You still awake? It shows your attention span is better than average. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to keep your windows shut.